Hello guys and welcome back to another video today. And in today's video, I'm going to be answering a pretty popular theology belief that's just highly debated about by many people, and it's called, is God silent? And there's a popular theology saying that goes along with this. There's probably a lot, but I'm going to be answering one of those today. It goes like this: is the teacher is silent during the test, they say, but some people, however, say God isn't silent, you just have to focus on him and he will reveal himself to you. I think the issue here is that people are constantly looking in the wrong system of what God's communication is logically. They treat God more like a physical entity who is aware that you exist in similar ways to humans. I don't want to strawman people at all, but from what I've noticed in very popular theology arguments, the reasoning tends to paint God in that way. And they always just, go through the classic theology trap. And for me, it's just a bunch of circles and it never really answers anything because it just does the same crap over and over again, and it just begs to question. I think God himself, in my worldview, is reality itself, so I have a more Spinoza's view of God. Now, there's one, if I'm looking at the stats, most philosophers, which are atheists, but they believe in a realist position of reality. And what I found interesting was that they believed reality was non-physical, but the things inside reality, I think like mathematics, I think like other things, were all part of the same substance. So my view is probably similar, that reality is non-physical, but I would include, I think, that the things in reality and stuff like the mathematical equations and the structure are logically separated in some way, not necessarily the same substance. Okay, but now I want to answer something about this reality, which I believe is God. And there's another popular theology thing, well, just in Christianity, philosophy stuff, that God exists outside of time and space, which that just doesn't work because God is non-physical and time and space are also non-physical. So I reject the position of Platonism. It would be logically impossible for God to physically exist outside of something that doesn't have physical form. But if God is non-physical and more like a non-physical foundation that operates within a system of the laws of logic, mathematics, laws of nature, and everything that exists is just a strict consequence of the whole entire connected system, these things aren't physical things but ontological things within the system. And these ontological things are not temporal. Again, they're just ontological things about reality, and we could say there's just one reality itself within that we understand and we can conceptualize. And these things are completely fixed in a deterministic way. They can't come into existence. They've always existed. And then my next belief would be that the past is infinite and that there's an eternal universe that is also completely fixed as well. So there was no beginning. God didn't just create the universe. Does not, because you can't really like trace that back. But God is just the distinction of why anything can even work in that way. Now, I want to answer another popular theology saying. Well, not really. They don't. Not really a saying, but they kind of. It seems like they heavily emphasize this, that God knows every single event. And it just, to me, doesn't really make any sense. It sounds like it's just a bunch of logical contradiction. Because if God is a non-physical distinction of, and he's just reality itself and stuff, how would he know you exist physically? Like, they treat it, in the arguments, they tend to treat it more like a physical being understanding of it. And maybe they don't truly mean that, but structurally the arguments tend to go in that kind of way, even if they don't really want it to go in that kind of way. I would say that God knows these things through logical distinctions based on the system that is true. So there's probably like a potential amount of things that could happen, and there's just probably many, many different examples I could go over. The fact that the United States is a true country is not something that's sitting in this realm. It's just a non-physical truth of what's possible. There's an infinite potential possibility slash outcomes of what could happen. If God is hypothetically real, the very fact you exist is based on these logical consequences that allow physical things to even think, make choices, and many other things. We could just say it's stored as fundamental information. So God isn't silent because he's trying to do something for the sake of his plan. His plan is simply just a logical way he works, and it's completely structural. So God is basically structurally silent. Here's an example. People praying to God may claim to feel the Holy Spirit and just be filled with divine wisdom and clarity with their own thoughts. God is filling you, but he's not filling you in the way most classical theology teaches. People are just learning things through shared human connection, their past journey. They're learning things based on what happens in real life. These moments feel real to them, and regardless of the feelings themselves are limited to their brains, there is a cause slash influence for these feelings that is not a feeling itself. Obviously, there is a cause for the feelings themselves, like in the brain, like the natural response for the feelings. But I think there's another cause, a cause like an influence for what produces or starts that natural response that is not inside the brain at all. An analogy would be if you have a radio, the things in the radio can start, and the radio can work and stuff, but then there can be things outside of the radio that that kind of influence the radio to even work. And these things can be positive effects or even negative effects. But within Christianity, I would say that these things are mostly positive effects. So it's not that God didn't reach this person. It's that he reaches this person through normal life without breaking any natural laws. The suffering they went through shaped who they are as a person. The friends they made, the sins they committed, the people that tried to help them and pray for them to potentially reach this individual. So we can say that this is still God that does these divine things, but not in a mystical way, but simply a systematic way. And I would also add it's systematically personal, so we can still have a personal view of God without it becoming mystical and logically impossible. Now, the way we understand God is deeply symbolic, and viewing him as a physical being is completely natural because our brains are wired to see God in a more human way, but it is also natural to see God through the lens of reasoning. Now, you're probably asking, how can God be personal but non-physical? Okay, because sometimes people will use this classic trap and say there's only two options. Either you believe in the God that Einstein believed in, like a deistic version of a God that's non-religious, doesn't intervene, or you believe in a God that's the Christian God, that's this physical, personal God that reveals, and he's the creator of the universe, and that the universe had a beginning. But this wouldn't really make sense. It's just you're forcing two options that are logically incomplete. Because when I say a systematically personal God, I would say we have the ability to have emotions and stuff. And yeah, emotions are physical things, but they're produced by things that are non-physical. So they're personal in that way that it's built into the system itself. So we can deeply feel that is part of what is real structurally. Because if you just took the view that there's just a physical being that has these emotions and stuff, well, what would constitute that? That's the problem. I want to go for the justification that exists in the real world, because people argue for something that doesn't exist. That's not true. It's not in reality. So it makes more sense for me to label it as a systematically personal view of God that is reality itself. And the way he intervenes is, through that systematic lens, and I think that's more logically consistent with reality. I think this video was really important for me to talk about, like, some people may have the beliefs in mainstream theology, and at the end of the day, they have different beliefs than us, and it's not a horrible thing to have those beliefs. I don't think that different beliefs is necessarily bad as long as their faith and trust is put into Jesus Christ. But it could affect the way that they pray. Maybe they're praying more in a way that they expect God to just do things that are more absurd and not really in the existence of reality. Because if you go back to the New Testament and just study Jesus in the Gospels, the answers, the things he gives, and especially the way he says to pray, is more in line just with the Lord's will. It doesn't say you get all these things or pray for a husband or pray for a wife necessarily. It's just simply pray to do the Lord's will. And I think that, I mean, it may be harder for us to grasp because he has a lot of harder teachings and it's harder for even me to grasp. But the way we pray needs to be more consistent with the truth. And some people think, well, the truth is not a systematic thing, really. It just is Jesus Christ. It is Jesus Christ. Well, I mean, there's two aspects to that. Yes, Jesus Christ is the truth in the lens of a salvation sense, that he's the way, the truth, and the life, and he's the only one who gets us to heaven, and that's how we inherit everlasting life. But he is also part of the chain of a systematic truth, and that systematic truth is also really important. We kind of need that systematic truth because that's what we rely on. Jesus relied on that a lot for some of the things. And when I say this, I don't think we need to necessarily know everything about every single reasoning thing to live a better life and understand it, because there's a lot of people out there who don't know a lot about reasoning, but they still live in the Lord's will in a normal way. But some people, maybe more so people on social media, are kind of not just in the theology trap, but they're in more of a like delusional kind of thinking of what the Lord is and what the Lord will do. But at least I think the people in some of the mainstream theology things just have different beliefs than us, but still live a pretty good, faithful life to the Lord. But I think the thing I said at the beginning of the video, I think whenever I was talking about the teacher is silent during the test and stuff, yes, there's a logical way, and I gave the logical way for that. But I think if I look at it in a very metaphoric way, we could see some truth to it. The truth to it is not in the normal theology or what they teach. The truth to it could be, well, if you generally focus on God more in the right way, not that he's a supernatural entity that gives you all the answers, but that he's simply the truth, and you realize that, and you're aware of who God truly is a personal, systematic revelation, and you're just living a graceful life. You're focusing more on who God is in the right aspect. And earlier, I know I said reasoning isn't. We don't have to know everything all the time, but I still think reasoning is very important. And this generation definitely probably doesn't prioritize reasoning as much. And I think that I just want to share this so this can help a lot of people and encourage them to just kind of read, when you're reading the Bible and stuff, don't just read it in a spiritual, like the normal supernatural way. Read it in the lens of reasoning and logic, because Jesus relied on reasoning and logic a lot. This isn't to attack anybody at all. This is to simply spread the truth of what I've realized and why this is really, really important. And so many people probably need to hear this. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Leave a comment below. Please subscribe to my channel. God bless you guys and peace out.